Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Adoption Dialogue, the show about all things adoption, the joys, the challenges, and the many complexities. My name is Judith Alexis Craig, and I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm an adoptee internationally and interracially from Haiti, who was adopted into a predominantly white Canadian family. I'm now a mother myself to both biological and non-biological children. I'm a therapist and social worker and support folks on their healing journeys in the adoption community. And I'm joined by my co-host, Sally Bafford.
My name is Sally Bafford, and I'm speaking from England. Judith, as you know, is in Canada. I was an interior architect, adopted twins who are from the Caribbean. I'm from Ghana in Africa, and gave up my job so that I could become a single parent and care for my children much more effectively, I hoped, and decided to take an interest in what happens to children in the care system. Went into that and soon became an adoption consultant, and that is why I'm here. Not only to talk to you and learn from you, but also to share our experiences with you as well. And that's why Judith, who's come from the other end of the spectrum as a foundling, and me as an adopted parent, are together here talking to you. I want to thank you for coming to Adoption Dialogue. Today we have Wendy Hayes, and Judith will tell us a little bit more about Wendy.
Yes, we're so pleased, Wendy, that you could join us today. Thank you so much for being on the show. Wendy has herself quite a complex story of adoption and permanence. And as you know, we like to be very real here on Adoption Dialogue and share, as we say at the beginning, the joys, the challenges, and the pain of adoption. And unfortunately, Wendy's story kind of covers a multitude of layers. Wendy is going to share with us a little bit about herself and her story and sort of the journey that she's now on as a young adult herself and sort of the journey that she's gone through to get to where she is today. So Wendy, thank you so much again for being with us. We'd love it if you could just start by telling us a little bit about your sort of journey into adoption and permanence and how things began for yourself.
For sure. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be here. To the TLDR, eh? Okay, so I have living experience in the child protection system in Ontario. I came into the system with my sibling, who's younger than me by 12 years. I had just turned 12. Pretty quickly, it was evident we weren't going to be doing a reunion to go and kind of go back to live with our biological mother, who we had been living with. They started looking at an adoption plan for my sibling, who was a toddler, which I think sometimes people say, oh, I want a toddler because I want a blank slate, right? But we can maybe come back to that. They started preparing me as the older sibling to never see my sister again as they made this plan. Now, thankfully or unthankfully, because complexity, as we know, the people who did end up being chosen as the legal adoptive parents for my sibling were interested in keeping a connection with me and eventually offered to have me come live with them. They never legally adopted me, but we formed this relationship. Given that we were siblings, given that I was 16 by the time I moved in with them, everyone just kept telling me, what an amazing story, what a success. This is so great.
So your sister is adopted by them. In the meantime, where are you living?
I stayed in the foster home for about a year. Yeah, as I got to know them, and then they invited me to come live with them.
So what you're saying is that when you lived in the foster home, they agreed to continue to have contact with you and your sister, which is why you developed a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. So I moved in with them when I was 16, and kind of everyone was telling me this is such a great story. Older youth adoption, huge. Siblings staying together, huge. And sure, those things are huge. And I was grieving so much. And I was still in contact with our birth mother while my sibling was not even allowed to know that I had contact with her.
Did she know that you had contact with your birth mother?
No, I wasn't allowed to talk about it.
So you would go off and quietly and see her and come back, but you would not tell her where you'd been. Yeah. Also, your birth mother would be asking about her, wouldn't she?
Oh yeah, for sure. She wanted to know.
To give her an update on how the sibling is doing. How does that make you feel being in this kind of situation? It's interesting. We all need to have an understanding of how that kind of being put in a position like that would make you feel. Share that with us.
I think that in a relatable way, it's about the silence. This is something I hear a lot of adoptees talk about, and I have worked in the field, so I have heard many, many stories. So it's really about the silence and really about not being able to be myself in a place I'm supposed to be able to belong, right? It was crushing. I was terrified my sibling would find out years later that I had ongoing contact with someone they weren't allowed to know about, and they would hate me for it. Like, it was not good.
It's such a horrible
and
burden to put on a young person, you know? That's a huge burden to lay at your feet, and to not have any support to how you even hold that information.
Mhm.
It sounds awful.
It's disappointing that, like, none of the workers, I don't mean to put it all on workers because it's on everybody, but like, no one around me was like, hey, like, this might be difficult for this kid to, like,
Yeah.
lie about this and continue this relationship and not be able to talk about it. And, like, you know, years later in retrospect, I kind of think back and I'm like, these people who essentially became my parents, why weren't they interested in meeting the people who raised me for the first 12 years of my life?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's a little bizarre and confounding to me. Like, I think I understand, you know, the difficulty, the grieving they in their own journey, their own parenting. Like, I get it, but in the same breath, I'm also like, I was with these people for so long, and you're not interested in meeting them. You know, I know we have to talk about safety concerns. In my particular case, safety concerns would have been really, really low. It was more like mental health, poverty, addiction experiences. So, like, in a supervised setting, it would have been safe. But it was a lot. It was really soul crushing. And I ended up publishing a book pretty much about that in and of itself, the silence. I called it The Heart That Silence Built. And only now, like, in my late 30s, I feel like we process these things over time, right? But, like, I'm really starting to really kind of dig in and process what that experience meant to me and how it taught me to diminish my value and not use my voice.
Wow. And so the silence of that experience, the silence that this forced you into, made you feel like your voice was not necessary anymore. Is that it? Is that what you're saying?
And my needs,
and your
my needs were
as
not
well.
important. Other people's
Wow.
comfort was more important than my needs, right? Because it was more important for these parents to be comfortable in what they were doing rather than go to a place of discomfort and try and understand my suffering.
You know,
right?
I've got to tell you this, Wendy, while you're saying it, I'm just thinking through the whole thing. And I'm realizing that what's happening here is that the authorities would make decisions without factoring into it the impact that it's having on the child. And whilst what they're making sound like common sense, they've never stopped to think, okay, it may be common sense, but if it's going to have any impact on that child, what would it be? And I think that, again, that's another thing that's come to my mind is, has anybody even stopped to consider talking to those children, asking them, how is this impacting on you? Because if anybody had done that, perhaps they would have heard. Do you think that if they'd asked you at that time, you would have been honest enough, you could have been honest enough to tell them how you felt? But do you think that you would have been, if you think back on it? Do you think you'd have been able to tell them how you felt at that time, the impact it was having on you?
I mean, like, if someone was just like, how are you doing? Like, no, I wouldn't have been able to articulate. Actually, a lot of understanding my experience was gaining language so I could articulate the things I was feeling. But, you know, if someone had maybe known to ask specific questions, like, hey, how is it for you when you leave to go see your mom? Because I call her my mom. Like, if I refer to mom, I'm talking about my bio mom. That's just the relationship I have with her. But, you know, when you go to see your mom, how does that feel for you when you can't tell your sibling or talk about it openly with the people in your life? I think I would have probably been able to be like, oh, actually, no, that doesn't feel great. Like, I might have needed someone to kind of know enough about adoption and the challenges to ask those specific questions, but no one was really asking because everyone was just happy that I found a home.
They were happy that not only did you find a home, but you were willing to go along with this idea or this stipulation that they had instituted for you. And because you were not complaining about it, then everything was okay. That clearly is what was happening there. Okay.
It's such a shame because it's not child-centered, right? And that's the exact opposite of what professionals in the child welfare field, are supposed to be focusing on. Where was the child-centeredness in all of this situation? And in listening to you, I don't hear that at all. And that's the real, you know, sadness. Of course, we know that happens, but this is such a clear example of it not being child-centered for neither yourself or your sister. As you said, there could have been safe interactions with your mom for both of you, right? And what we term as, so it was like you had openness and then she didn't. And how do you navigate that in life? Was there a point when, as she got older, you were able to share this information with her? Did you guys have to wait till she was 18? How did that sort of dynamic? Because I know one thing you mentioned was you were so scared about how she would react. You've had this contact with your mother and her not.
Yeah, so the weird dynamic is that my siblings still knew that she was adopted. So it was this kind of like baseline understanding, but I don't think they understood that we were adopted from the same place. Like, I don't know if like all these things come up later, right? But eventually, many, many years later, basically what happened was rising conflict as my sister got to her teen years. Very expectable kind of, you know, not to oversimplify it or like make it, you know, but it's just stuff you would expect in that age for someone who has experienced an adoption, started going through. Conflict rose, and kind of my relationship got even more tumultuous with the parents, right? I stopped talking to them kind of during this period where this conflict was rising, and eventually it came out that, you know, I had been visiting this whole time, but I'm also just having a memory where before all that happened, my adoptive parents took me and my sister out to dinner with our bio mom as like the first time my sister was meeting this person, I think at 14. I forget about it sometimes. It's so crazy.
How did that happen? I mean, from people who didn't want to know that you even had a birth mother or whatever it is, birth parents. What are the steps that led to them arriving at a place where you're not even talking about them meeting her, but taking you all to dinner with her? Now, you know, take us through the steps. How did you arrive at that place?
Interesting. My parents would definitely say that, you know, lying is bad and you shouldn't lie. You know, I kind of laugh ironically, but you know, this is a value they have. And, you know, that's where I think never lying about the fact that my sister was adopted came from.
Right.
And we know it's deeper than that, right? So saying you're adopted and you can ask me anything is different than creating a space where that child feels the comfort to ask anything truly. And I can point to several examples where I felt that was happening, and I even tried to tell them. One example, my sibling asked, "Where do I get my red hair from?" They were old enough to understand that stuff gets passed down biologically. And the answer that my parents gave them was, well, there's red hair in our family, right? Like their thing was, well, I want them to not feel different. I want, you know, your sister to not feel like they don't belong here. And I was trying to say yes, and right? Because that's important. That's really good intention. Yes, and they're looking for a truth right now, and you're not giving it to them.
Wendy, by the way, have they seen your mother's picture, your birth mother's picture before? Oh, your birth mother presumably is red-haired. Is she red-haired? Your birth mother?
She's not. It actually comes from the biological father's side, but my grandmother has red hair. So our shared like maternal grandmother has red hair.
And had you told them that at some point? Did they
So after I saw that exchange happen, I like followed up with them after. Like I didn't insert myself into that moment. I didn't want to make any, you know what I mean? But I said, hey, like I really think my sister like understands that there's a biological component to this, and that's the information they're looking for. I think they're looking for a truth. And I don't feel they got it. And I think that means they won't be comfortable asking questions in the future. They got angry at me. They freaked out at me. How dare you call us liars? Yeah, it was pretty bad. And here I am just coming from a place of, you know, I worked at the Adoption Council of Ontario at the time. They knew that. I'm an adoption encyclopedia. I know lots. They could have tried to, it sounds weird, but use me as a way to like really be intentional on this journey. No, shut down. So there was a few experiences like that.
I think we're going to find that probably it's a you know, being caught out like that. That's what it is. The defense mechanism, isn't it? It's a defense thing, really, more than anything else. And I think that, you know, they suddenly realize, oh dear, we put our foot into it. But, you know, some people just don't want to accept it. And so they'd rather, you know, okay, I hear that. So what happened?
Yeah. I mean, just to that point too, as I get older, I see how a lot of this is their own healing journey that they maybe haven't been able to go on. So they haven't been able to meet those needs, right? That's why healing as parents is so important. But yeah, so kind of had this weird upbringing where I was like not able to talk about this connection I had. Eventually my sister met this person, but it was just kind of like a one-off.
Wait, she met your mother? How did she meet?
She did eventually ask, like, can I meet this person? Because she knew she was adopted, right? So it's kind of like, well, I know I'm adopted, so I have a biological mom. Like, can I meet her?
Yeah.
And at 14, finally that kind of came up, and they finally like pushed for it. So we went to dinner, and then again, it just went back underground. I think there's so many feelings there for a young 14-year-old. They need the support from someone in their life to put that language and acknowledge those feelings. So if it's that hard to ask, you can't keep asking, right? I'm sure that was huge for my sister to ask for. So we had that dinner, but then it kind of went back to the way it was before.
How was the dinner? Was it a cordial, comfortable, joyful dinner, or it was a very difficult elephant in the air kind of dinner? How was it?
It was awkward.
Awkward.
Mm.
Honestly, that's the main word. We went out to a public place, went to a buffet, and it was just awkward. And yeah, I don't know, like it was just weird because again, it's that we're here, we know what's going on, but none of us are really going to talk about it.
Wow.
We're not really going to
Right.
put words to this experience that we're having right now.
Wow. What did she say afterwards? How did she feel about that whole encounter? Did she have an opinion on it?
She was ecstatic. She was ecstatic.
Mm.
I mean, she wanted to be a mom. Like that's, she wanted that. And she was very hurt when CS got involved in our life, but she was so happy.
I think it's important too to point out, and correct me, was there any support from its local authority in England and its Children's Aid Society in Canada around that? Because often, or what should happen, right, is there should be support provided to all parties involved. So was there any support offered to any of you when you were going through this reunion period at all?
I mean, offered, certainly not. It had been years, like more than 10 years since the adoption had happened. We weren't in touch. So that means the onus is on the parents to reach out to a CAS to ask for it and probably be told it's not there anyway. And they certainly would not be looking for reaching out to these, like they were very resistant. Because later I tried to be like, oh, like there's this training, there's these groups, will you get involved? You're going to learn stuff. But they just wouldn't have reached out for something like that.
Sorry, did you say England? Did you start off in England?
No, sorry.
No,
I'm in
I was
Ontario.
just giving the example of the equivalent to CAS, so people understand.
Which one is CAS?
CAS is a Children's Aid Society, so that's
I
in
see.
Canada.
Okay.
And then in the States, it's Child Protection Services, so CPS. And in the UK, it's the local authority who has that. So they all play the same role, essentially. So it's just to kind of, because we have quite a big audience from the UK, so just to clarify.
But that's an important clarification, Judith, so people don't understand what that means. So obviously your birth mother was ecstatic because she was meeting a little girl for the first time. And how did she take that whole experience, your sister?
We didn't talk about, again, we had an established, like, years of us, me and my sibling, not talking about these things together, right? Like, we didn't talk about it. Like, at that point, when they met my mom, our mom, like, my sister didn't know I had been visiting. Like, that wasn't out yet. We had just had the visit. Right. It wasn't out that I had never lost contact.
So she also thought that you were seeing her for the first time, like her. That's what she would have thought.
I don't know. Honestly, I should ask her about this. Like, now I'm so curious. Like, do you remember that? What was that like for you? I don't know what she was going through her head, to be honest.
Wendy, what you're saying means that because almost like a gagging order on this issue, it had almost silenced the two of you. And therefore, in a way, it had stopped conversation between the two of you about issues like this. Is that really what happened? Is that what happened?
It is. Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it. And actually, the conflict that kind of led to what I would call the breakdown of our family, now that my sister is a teenager, gave us the most space to talk to each other. And in the last 2 to 3 years, I've both become a caregiver because due to the breakdown happening, they got kicked out of the house. And our relationship is the strongest it's ever been because we can now finally process these experiences together in a way we couldn't before, in a way that no one else understands the specifics of the weirdness of our parents, like no one really gets the weirdness of our parents outside. And that has been incredibly healing for me. Like that has given me a gift of, I don't even know if I can put words to it, that we can finally have these conversations.
And does that mean that her relationship with them also broke down then as a result of it?
They're still keeping in touch and talking to each other at the beginning.
But she doesn't live with them anymore. So she left as well.
Kicked out, actually.
She got kicked out. It's interesting. It's so important to clarify this because it just tells you, doesn't it, the power of truth.
Yeah.
The power of truth is the truth will set you free. And if you can talk about the truth openly with everybody, then you all find your level and you all work out a way to make this comfortable between all of you. It's difficult. That's going to be a difficult truth, whichever way you look at it. But if you can talk about it, at least that's a starting point, And I think also looking from an adoptive parent, looking at it as them and looking from their perspective, I think what it was happening here was, first of all, let me ask, did they have children before? Did they have any children?
Yeah.
They did.
They had a biological son, and I do know that there was a miscarriage in their history. So, complicated stuff, full of grief, right?
So when you were living there with them, you were living with their biological son as well, were you? I see. I see. Well, I was just going to say that I thought that would have happened was people who couldn't have children, and so they get very precious about it. But that's not the case in this one because they had their own
Mhm.
biological children. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a very
Okay. I think that's often the complexities within adoption, right? Whether a family has a biological child or not, they've come to adoption for a variety of reasons. It still speaks to the fact that they really have to work on their own trauma that they've lived through before they go on this journey, right? Because a lot of times what we see happen is folks think, yeah, I can do this, I'm ready. They come to the table, but what we find out is that often when children come into their family, they get sort of re-triggered, right? So they're now dealing with their own traumatic experiences and their child. So that happens, they can't then support their child as fulsomely as they need to, right? So it sounds like, and without knowing and speaking to your parents, we want to honor that we have not spoken with them, but that sounds like that's very big likelihood, right? Is what we often see is what I would say, right? Is that folks haven't done their work fulsomely enough. And so they're re-traumatizing, they're releasing their trauma response onto their children and therefore not effectively parenting, right? In a wholesome enough way. So what age would you say that your sister was kicked out of the family home? How old was she when that happened?
How old? So that happened just before their 18th birthday. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. When your sibling got kicked out from family home, where did they go? Did they go back into foster care being almost 18? I know that's a very sort of precarious time and stage. What was sort of the option for them?
Weird. This is a bit of a weird story, but I was there the night it happened. So thankfully I was around to kind of catch the fall.
Mm-hmm.
We have biological dads, different biological dads, sorry. So my biological dad knew that there was this rising conflict in the house, and I'd kind of been talking to him, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, what if something happened? So the second time my sibling met my biological dad was the night I drove her to his house to stay there for at least the night, like temporary stay.
You drove her to where?
My biological dad's house.
Oh, house. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And she kind of camped out in the basement for a while. Yeah.
And were you living with him at this time, or were you out on your own? Because I know you're 12 years different, so you're out living your life as an independent young adult, doing your thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm married, so I was living where I live with my partner, and just kind of. And this is, like I said, the second time she met him.
Wow.
Right? Like how uncomfortable. And if I can, there's kind of a funny story to this because it just goes to show how disconnected we both were from our kind of shared experience. We were sitting in the basement and I was helping her, and all of a sudden she's like freaking out. She's like, no one understands what it's like to just get picked up and dropped into a stranger's house. And I was kind of like, we need to talk. I know exactly what it's like. It was so bizarre.
Yeah.
Right? Those moments so disconnected from the reality and the truth of our experience.
But it's interesting that even after all those years of living with them, she still felt that she was living in a stranger's house.
Oh, this is when I took her to my dad's place. Sorry.
No, she's talking about your dad's home or her adoptive parents' home.
No, my biological dad, not the adoptive parents. So they got kicked out, and I took them to my biological dad's house. Yeah.
And she couldn't come and stay with you then, could she not, at that time?
I mean, we weren't prepared.
Yeah.
We were living in one bedroom.
Okay. Yeah.
Based on where my dad was located, and they were still like my sister was still kind of speaking to her parents. I think they were still trying to figure stuff out. There was so much to figure out, and it just made sense. My dad was closer, so it made sense for her to stay there for a bit. But when it became obvious that returning home was not the option, and neither was living independently by a long shot, that's kind of when I made peace with it. I was like, okay, we have to partner. I was like, to figure out what we're gonna do because I need to take care of this kid.
So was your dad comfortable with the idea that this is his, in a way, kind of a stepdaughter, isn't it? In a kind of way, even though not directly, but was he comfortable with it? He was not.
No, he's not really interested in like having a relationship with my sister.
So it was a bit of an imposition on him, really.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, I'm happy to do it for you. You're my kid.
But I suppose in reality, when it happened, he realized, actually, I'm not ready for this. I suppose that's probably what happened, is it? But in reality,
for my dad?
Yeah. I mean, he said it was okay for your sister to come and stay there, but when it did happen, he probably realized that he's not ready for that kind of commitment.
Well, they were not even interested, much less ready. It was always, this is where it gets complicated, but it was a temporary solution. He's like,
Temporary.
he was doing me a favor. But again, it's like, here's this person that I'm deeply connected to, who is part of my family, who some other extension of my family, no interest.
Yeah. There's a lot of complexities that, it's very interwoven with the family. And I think often we do see that when there's, siblings who have one shared parent and one different parent, then it adds a whole other layer of complexities of, well, you're not really my child. So, right. And not wanting or engaging in relationship and whatnot. But it sounds like at least he was able to be there in the short term it sounds like an emergency basis to provide shelter for a short period of time. And then eventually it sounds like, you decided you and your partner had to sit down and have that conversation. And you were saying that you had to say to your partner, listen, I have to be the one now. It falls on me and therefore us. How did that conversation go? Was your partner receptive to that conversation?
I was scared. Like any adoptee, I'm terrified of anybody leaving me for any reason ever, like many of us. But I was really scared because we were also quite clear that we didn't want kids. Just not interested in being parents.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even so much this like situation. It was just like, here's like, we agreed that was not what we were doing, and now I'm asking him to do it.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And even
So
though she was a bit of an older person, it's still, those conditions still applied. So did he agree eventually?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, when I first talked to him about it, I was like, listen, I'll move out. I'll get my own place. I'll take care of my sister. We can like date again. It would be like fun. We can move back in when all this is over. Cause I'm like, I can't burden you with this, right? I cannot. And he looks at me, he's like, I'm coming with you.
You didn't have the courage to come out and ask him outright. You had to go through the circuitous way of doing so. Bless. And he was actually willing to have done it in all the while. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
beautiful.
tough. Yeah.
That's
And
deep love though too, isn't it? Like that's truly, your partner, we don't always know what we're signing up for, right? And what's going to come down the line and what surprises we may have. And that's of course a significant one, but I just honor that love and that commitment to you and therefore to your sister was extended. And that he, the thought of, no, we're not doing any of that. We're together in this. So the fact that he was able to stand beside you and support you and your sister on this journey, I know he's not here, but I just want to give a second and honor him for agreeing. And it sounds like y'all have a beautiful relationship. That does take a lot.
So is your sister still with you?
Yep. Yeah.
She is. That is truly wonderful. That really is. And also the other thing that I'd like to know is the biological child who was in the house that you all were adopted into. Was this child older than all of you or younger? Where did he fall in line?
3 years younger than me. And then my sister's 12 years. So there's 9 years. So 9 and then 3 between me and him. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get on with him at all?
We got on. We never got close. I think he was very bitter.
Yeah, bitter about the two of you joining their families. So he was not prepared. You see, he was not prepared. He was not prepared for an adoption. Okay, now you see, this then all begins to make a lot of sense, because one of the things that is so important is to prepare the child who is in the house for bringing anybody else in. Because honestly, if that child in the house is not ready to accept any other child that's coming in, that adoption placement is not going to last. Because at the end of the day, that birth family is going to feel that their priority is towards their own birth child. When they start making all the negative noises, you're going to find that they will side with their child, sometimes even blindly. And eventually, it can unfortunately undermine the placement of anybody new that's coming in. So you see, what is done here in England is that before a child is placed into any home where there's a child in existence, a lot of assessment is done about the relationship with that child who already exists. And to find out also from the child actually themselves, I'll have a chat with them. And even when you hear the way the child talks, you'll know whether the child is ready or not, or will not do it. And there are certain children would not be able to take kindly to it. And so you just say, look, we know what you feel, but we feel that you need to think about your child as well. And because of this child and their needs, it's probably not a good idea for you to bring anybody else in. And I'm wondering whether that kind of an assessment would have been done of this family that adopted the two of you. Do you think it was done?
No, absolutely not. In fact, my parents told me to my face, it wasn't up to him. We pick, we're the adults. He has to deal with what we pick as the adults, right? So I mean, they weren't good at picking up on our emotions. It wasn't magically present for their biological son.
So they were saying that it's their decision and not their biological son's decision. Okay, that says it all. Because unfortunately, it is. It plays a big role in it. And even though they don't want to admit it to themselves, it really does. I mean, if you look back on that situation and the way it turned out, do you think that if they had prepared that young boy for the two of you coming in, it may have helped in some kind of way, do you think? It's difficult to say.
Maybe, but I would still say it was for them to prepare for the way that would unfold if he wasn't ready, right? Because in talking with my sister, looking back, there's a very clear hierarchy in that house. Him, my sister, I think because they got her younger, so it was like, well, we get to mold and shape her. And then me, because I was the 16-year-old who came and already had personality and opinions that they didn't like. And in some ways, I think they were like, well, we can't fix this one. So, it felt very, very clear. And one story I share, it's a small thing, but we did go on family trips. When you come back from an international flight, you have to do a declaration form. 4 names can go on that form. And I was number 5, and I always filled out my own. And it's a small thing, but all of those small things paint a picture of your place in that family. And I was always the 5th.
So you're always the outsider.
Yeah. Wow. They didn't want to adopt a 16-year-old. They didn't want me. Yeah. I think what happened was they knew they didn't want to separate siblings, but they didn't want siblings. They didn't want the 16-year-old to come to their family. They weren't looking for that. So I don't know if they were ever really in it for me.
I think this is where we have to talk about parents. This is a very important topic because it's talking about a lot of adoptive parents and their genuine readiness to take on the responsibility of looking after another child. A lot of them know that, there's a whole romantic thing. I want to have a child, I'm going to have a girl with ribbons in their hair. And, when we come to Black people, I'm going to braid their hair and put ribbons in it and all those colorful beads and all those things. And it all sounds so romantic and fantastic. The reality is we're dealing with a human being who has emotion. And when it comes to emotions, and unfortunately the fact that when the child is that young as well, and especially because of the trauma they've been through before they come, they really have difficulty with communication. So they're never able to articulate what they're going through. And therefore, the parents have to be super sensitive. And one of the things that I began to realize very early is apart from telling them that they're adopted, it's also important to be able to talk about their birth parent in a funny kind of way, as if they're part of your family. You have to. Even I remember one day, something happened and they wanted to know. And I told them, actually, I don't know that because I've never met her. What, Mommy? You haven't met her? Really? But we talk about her as if she's part of the family. I said, I know, but at that time, the situation was such that it wasn't allowed. So, it wasn't part of it. And also, not really that she couldn't be found. That's the other thing. And also, the question that you said about when you talk about the red hair, I was just thinking about what would people normally do. And I'll tell you what I had. I remember when my son came up to me and asked me, Mom, I really want to be tall. Will I be tall when I grow older? And I thought to myself, what do I tell him? And I said, look, Chloe, because I don't know your birth family, I don't know what the height situation there is. I can't answer that question. But what I can tell you is that in my family, look at Uncle so-and-so and look at Uncle so-and-so. They're tall. But look at me. I'm so short. So I don't know the answer. So we'll just have to wait and see, won't we? Let's just hope that you will grow to be tall. And it was a very honest answer, and he was happy with it. Yeah. I didn't really answer his question, but I was truthful to him, and he just accepted it, And I think that's how, as adoptive parents, we have to work our way around answers that will make the child feel comfortable, even though it might be an uncomfortable truth, And I think this is something that maybe does need some kind of training for parents to know, because sometimes, and also it's about possession. A lot of people go to adopt children to possess them. And if you go in to adopt a child to possess them, you are setting yourself up to fail, because that child was never your birth child ever. She's not carrying your genes. Therefore, a lot of things about her is going to be different from you, whether you like it or not. And that's a natural nature versus nurture. Therefore, you've got to be prepared that there will be differences. You've got to find a way to work with them, And if they're sitting there thinking that, no, this is my child, and therefore I want to possess them, then there are going to be difficulties.
Yeah.
There will be
You know,
difficulties.
I think one thing I see a lot, because I'm in trainings and I facilitate trainings and I take trainings, I'm all over the place. I'm all up in the training game. But one thing I see a lot, and I think this is true for parents, regardless of how you come to parenting, no parent wants to see their child in pain. And the knee-jerk reaction is to protect from that pain. But sometimes when we protect, we're doing a disservice because we're also clawing back the truth to do that. And, one thing, I saw a meme once and I really loved it. It's going to stand out. Like, a parent's job is to prepare the child for the path, not the path for the child, or to protect the child from the path, right? You can't protect them. They're going to go out into the world. They're going to have life experiences. You're not going to be able to, but you can be there to catch them if they fall, or to give them a Band-Aid if they scrape their knee. Whatever that looks like, all the way into adult life.
And the thing is, we had a conversation about this yesterday, exactly, and talking about the fact that we cannot mollycoddle the children. You've got to let them face the reality of life, because when they go out into the world, it's a harsh world. If you don't prepare them for that real world, then you're setting them up to fail, and it's as simple as that. Really. So, as somebody who trains people, looking at your situation, I want you to look at it objectively. And from the start, tell us, from your training experience, what would you have done differently from the get-go? What do you think to have had a better outcome? What would you recommend should have been done differently to get a different outcome?
It feels difficult to pin down. I'm a big advocate for not approving families for adoption. I think some families just probably shouldn't continue to go through the process, because I know from my experience and from listening to other people, it's the white, married, financially, upper middle class people who come through that system, who get approved like there's no tomorrow, because on the surface it all looks so good, right? And the very human element of healing, it's like, how do you even fix that in a journey when someone's determined to be a parent and they're going to do it? They're going to figure it out. They're going to do it. It feels very difficult. I'm really big on really saying some parents I don't think should be approved for adoption, but otherwise, I think healing really needs to be part of all parenting journeys to begin with. But as a system, I don't know the answer to this question. How do we look at people's healing journeys in a way that isn't critical, but it's there? And so we know the parent is there to do the work, because it's never about being perfect, but there has to be some kind of progression.
So here you're talking about the parents who are coming to adopt. So it's almost like before they become assessed, it sounds to me like you're saying that they need to go to some kind of training to help them to find the areas that they need healing in. Because if the crucial areas that are going to affect their parenting, in other words, because if they don't deal with it, they're going to meet it. And there'll be triggers in that relationship that will set things off in the wrong direction. You're saying.
Truth, I think, is a good place to look at, right? Because if you have parents coming in who can do the truth telling part, that shows me that there's some work happening there, that they have to reconcile the difficulty of that truth to themselves, and they can communicate it to their kid. But, as someone who's done a lot of training, I've also seen people come out the other end and they're like, no, I think all this is wrong. I'm right. I want a kid. This is how I'm going to do it.
The people who are intransigent, they are not flexible. They don't want to change. Not willing to listen to anybody else. You see, the red flag for me, as somebody who sits on an adoption panel, is the person who tells me that, no, I make all the decisions, not my child. In a case like this, and I'm asking, how would your child deal with this sort of situation? No, I make the decisions and not my child. See, immediately, that's a red flag for me, straight away. And when you sit on adoption panels, we have panels here that make decisions about parents who can come forward to adopt. And when you have a panel that actually tests and challenges a lot of these things, you find that a lot of those panels end up having adoptive parents who work. Nice. It's only a trial and error thing. It works. And the ones who are very lenient, you end up with then the breakdown level is very, very high. And what you're telling us now means that the assessment process is one. But also, when that fails, we've got to make sure that when they come to panel, it's much more stringent. We shouldn't just rubber stamp them through the system because they have money, And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the time, people sort of become blinded to the fact that they got all the money. And here in England, because there isn't a lot of money around to support them, when a person has money, it's almost like they could have saved the day. But it doesn't really work like that. And what you're sharing with us is a very painful experience And we all need to hear it because the outcomes are extremely difficult and affecting human lives, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, sorry, maybe one more thing if you don't mind.
Oh,
You know,
please.
talking
Please go
about
ahead.
how do we make this work? I always feel like it's remiss not to mention the context that it happens in, right? Because,
Yeah.
you know, the kind of colonial white supremacist angle in terms of how the adoption system is set up here, it's very like divide and conquer. Like families are this tiny unit, and either you can make it by yourself like that, or you can't, and then you don't deserve to be a family. And, you know, something I've definitely learned from like Indigenous and Black communities so strongly is that community aspect is so essential, right? And having multiple people look out for that child, right? In a perfect world, the idea of adoption as we have today, which is I remove you from one and give you to another, basically as property, that's a colonial worldview, right? That's not this parent struggling, here's their wraparound community so that child now doesn't have to experience disconnection and displacement. I don't know how to move towards that in this system. I really don't, but I'm dreaming and I'm, you know, manifesting for it.
The episode we had only yesterday, in fact, was exactly that, where we had a gentleman who was talking about the Ghanaian community, and he grew up in a community like that, and saying that it was a compound situation where many families lived there, lots of mothers, lots of fathers, and the children would go and eat, and they all ran around. And every parent in that compound had an equal duty over all the other children there. They would correct them, you know. And he was saying to us, when he grew up, when he was going to get married, it wasn't his mother he went to. He went to tell his aunt first, you know, or somebody else he needed something important. He went to his uncle. And then the uncle told his father, you know. So you grew up in an environment like that where because you have so many different, and you get the kind of parenting you get is, okay, here's a parent who will be good for sweets, and here's a parent who's good for my emotions, and here's a parent who's good for food, you know. And so you get all the range of parenting from all the people around you, and in the end you kind of feel, all right, you know, I can just bob along. And he's grown up and he's doing just fine. And it is significant that another lady that I know who comes from his family, who grew up exactly like that, has come out and she married Jimmy Hesse. She was one of the leading women at the UN, who almost became a secretary general, you know, who was very, 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 very successful and very knowledgeable and successful in life, not just as an accomplished person, but also as a married person and a mother and a grandmother, you know, very wholesome person. And so you're right. But then this is where the whole about idea about takes a village to raise a child. That is what the village is. That's the village. But you're right. I do not know actually how such a thing can be implemented here in the West.
I
It's
think
just
our
not set up.
systems really need to shift, because as I've, you know, as I'm receiving that more and more, it's such a beautiful answer. And you know, I worked with child protection for many years, and what I would see very, very blatantly, and it was almost 100% of the time, when say there was a person who had a child, whether they were a teenager or older, if they had family support around them, more often than not, a child was able to stay within that family home, that dynamic, right? Because there was a support. You could call on auntie for one thing. You could call on grandma. You could live with grandma and then have this structural support around you with uncles and whoever was coming into the home and fathers. When I saw those people, and it was absolutely heartbreaking to see this time and time again with those folks who did not have that family support, often from people who had come through the system themselves and never had that familial connection
With anyone.
So what I would always say is, we as a system have now failed this child, and that generation has gone again and again, and we see that repeat, right? So what do we do to stop that from happening? And I think this is a great segue into the experience that you've had now, Wendy, in making connection, even as a young adult, knowing the importance of connecting with a parent figure, if you will, or an adult who can provide support to you, right? So we don't want to keep everybody else in suspense. I know your circumstance, but can you just share with us sort of that, what that has been like for you in obtaining that parental sort of support, and what that's meant to you essentially over these past few years? That would be wonderful.
You nailed the nail on the head with the comment about intergenerational, right? I'm a caregiver now, and I need support to show up in the ways I want to for my kid, right?
Yeah.
And I also need to be conscious that I'm filling my own cup so that I can do that. A perfect example, my kid was having a breakdown. I was away. I was like this close to canceling my trip and scooting back home. And I just messaged my human and I was like, can you be there? Like, are you available? Can you be there? Like, I needed to make sure nothing would happen that night. Like, it was that serious.
Yeah.
But I also, it was like my first trip in like a year. Like, I hadn't gone away with my partner and I was like feeling the split of guilt, right? So that was huge.
You need to take us back because you jumped into a situation that we don't know about. How is it that you and your husband say you don't want to have children and suddenly you're telling us you're a caregiver? How did you arrive at that place?
Well, I am, because my sibling got kicked out and I said I would take care of them.
Your
right?
sister. Oh, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, your sister got kicked out.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I get it. Oh, you were, and you and the two of you were away at that time. Is that what you're
This
saying?
was like after my sister moved in with us, but it was just one of those moments where, you know, the person I'm giving care to needs it and I'm not there to do it. And who do I call?
Yeah.
I can't call the adoptive parents. They don't know how to deal with a mental health breakdown. Like, if they did, we probably wouldn't be in this place. But now I have this person who is that connection in my life, who's like a parent figure to me, who I can talk to when I'm frustrated, and in a way who gets the trauma, right? So it's not, well, lay down the law, right? Like, we talk about this all the time in adoption spaces, the nuances of being a caregiver to someone who has been through trauma, and how it can look very different than parenting a biological child in many circumstances. And if you don't have people around you who kind of get that, like why I'm making what other people might perceive to be weird decisions, but I can contact this person and say, this is what I'm going through. I'm so frustrated. This is what I'm going to do. What do you think? Like, I have that confidant from someone who really deeply gets it. And I never had that before.
And the person also in care at some point?
No, this particular person was not, but I kind of consider her in that group because I met a lot of people who, if someone had found out what was going on in their family, they would have been sent to care. It's just that that didn't happen and they never went to care, right? So we have these very adjacent kind of experiences around us.
Oh, so what you're saying is that so they could relate to what you went through, and that's how they're able to help you. I think that's very important because it's not just anybody. It's got to be somebody who has a proper understanding of the journey you've taken, because when they come on board, nothing's going to surprise them. They're ready for it. And I think that's important. And that's why people who are going to take on roles like that need to be conscious of what their strengths are, what their capabilities are. Because you could go in there all altruistic, oh, I'm going to help somebody, you go there, and actually you can't relate to anything that they've been through. So it's a kind of a pointless exercise. So do those people have to be assessed? How do they go about getting these humans in your life? Explain the word human. Where does that come from? I mean, I know obviously they're human, but why they use the term human? And also, how does this whole system work? I've never heard of it before. Be interesting to know what that's all about.
Yeah. So I work at a place called Never Too Late, and we're focused on finding like a meaningful connection, a caregiving connection for older youth who are at risk or have aged out, right? They either have or they will.
So these are people, presumably, who've been through the care system, come out of the care system at the other end with no parent, nobody around, no parent, no siblings, and they're literally out there open to the elements on their own, typically.
Well, and I would challenge that, right? Because it's not necessarily that these people have no one. They might still be connected to biological parents. I'm connected to mine, but I support her.
I get it.
She needs my help, right?
Yeah.
I need someone that I can ask for help in my life. So, they're going to have all different kinds of family experiences, but they don't have that permanent person in their life that can be there for them no matter what, right? Workers are gone, workers are 9 to 5, biological family is complicated, maybe don't have anyone else in their life, like an auntie to be around for them. True, right? So we're still figuring out what all this readiness process stuff looks like for our group, and how we do it. But the reason we call them humans comes out of a lot of conversations with lived experts. I don't want parents. My parents have failed me. I know that. I have bad experience with the idea of someone being my caregiver, right? Because I've been failed, especially for those who come in and then like bounce around foster homes. Maybe someone's experienced an adoption breakdown after being told this is your forever family. I don't want to be adopted. I know what that is. And I went to go live with these people and then they sent me back here. So it's really just language. And so someone said, like a young person with living experience said, I just want a human being that is there for me, that accepts me as I am. And so we use the word humans, right? But it's a great conversation starter and it's a good check-in, because if you're like, I don't want to be called that, I want to be called mom, I want to be called dad, well, you got some of your own stuff to work through, because this is what we're hearing from young people.
Human? What do you call your human then? What do you call your human?
I call her by name, actually, most of the time.
You don't call her auntie or uncle or anything. You just call her just by her name, Sally.
Just by her name, yeah.
And she's happy with that, and it works. Yeah.
It works for us. And there might be a kid who does, or a young person who's going to say, I want someone to call mom and dad. We're not going to tell you, no, you can't do that. We call them humans here. But it has to be on that person to decide that's what they want for themselves.
Yeah. And a kind of a mutual agreement. Because you see, and the reason I'll tell you why I ask you this. Because along the journey of my life, I met a lot of adults who I related to in the same way. So I talked to them because they're older than me. They're my mother's age group, who are good friends of mine. There are lots of things I talk to them about that I wouldn't talk to my mother. So I call them all aunties. They're not my birth auntie. You know, like Auntie Maya and Dolly and all of them. And they're all aunties of mine. And it just makes it just that much more special because they're not a friend. They're more than a friend. And so they come under the, the umbrella of auntie, and that just feels a bit comfortable because it means I'm a little bit closer to them, And that's why I asked that question, actually. That's the reason why I asked.
It's such a beautiful program. I'm so happy that it exists. I've had the privilege of working alongside the young people and supporting them as they are. And the beautiful thing is they do the training. They facilitate the training for these humans. So there is training that happens. There is a support network that's available and an assessment of sorts that they do to ensure, as Wendy's saying, that the right people are coming through this journey, right? And you're not looking for really more than what a young person is able to give. It's very much young person centric, which is, of course, as it should be, right? After all the trauma they've experienced. So I think it's a program that should spread across, across Canada, across the world, truly, because it does provide this beautiful connection for people who, as someone like in Wendy's position now, is now sort of the middle person. She wants the above and she's supporting somebody, her sister as well. So now, as she said, that elder to look up to go to with anything and everything, and it's so beautiful. And, I relate Auntie Sally I call her Auntie Sally because we formed that relationship. I the UK on my own, didn't have my family, have had challenges within my own family, of course, as well, being adopted into white family. There were a lot of things I couldn't always discuss, as openly or as freely. So having a Black elder that I could go to and embrace me as family has been truly life-changing, and I'm so thankful for the relationship that we have, and that I have with her children as well. So I think it just speaks so beautifully to the need that is out there for us all to connect. Yeah, it doesn't have to look just one way, but what we have to do as a society is open our minds and listen to each other from different cultures, right? Like kinship care, we were talking about that the other day on our show, and how that's been a very Afrocentric concept for centuries, right? You're just a child's biological parents die, they're evolved, they're just taken into the family, the larger family. That's kinship care, right? And in the UK, I saw that starting to happen. And now in Canada, I'm starting to see it happen more and more. But we're widening that net, right, in a way that's so crucial and so critical to ensure that young people are not left home.
Because you can see it in an animal kingdom. Look at elephants, for instance. You can have the whole herd of elephants coming by, and the mother might get killed somewhere along the line. But because the baby is part of this herd, he just meanders off to another mother who embraces it, and they just get on with life. The baby elephant will miss its mother, but he's got somebody else there who's playing the role, and it's not even up for discussion. Baby just is part of a herd, and therefore he's got the family wrapped around him. And this is how we really should look at it. And it's funny, we had this interesting conversation. A lot of the people who were there said, I grew up in a situation like that. I didn't even really analyze it in this way. But you're right, when we look at it in the nuclear family, which has its limitations as well, then you can see why things can go wrong so very badly, because you don't have anybody else outside of it that can even just to get, what do you think? At least that, even that alone, you don't have that. So then it means that you have to look what you went through. You have to take it all in, imbibe that problem on your own. You're gagged. You can't talk to anybody about it, and it is a difficult situation, really. It's a difficult, and that you come out of it on your feet is in itself a miracle. But well done. I mean, that's amazing what you've been through. And this program that you have, it's new then, is it? Is it something that you all started?
I think I'm considered to be one of the co-founders. I've been part of it since its early days. It's been around for, I want to say like 5 or 6 years now as a program. Just recently, we became our own organization. So we're like independent now, which is really, really exciting. And we're just trying to figure out all the things.
How do you attract the young people to it?
Well, we're actually in the process of hiring a lived expert coordinator. So we're hoping that person will be able to kind of coordinate the community aspect of it. But right now we don't work directly with young people. We have to work with someone who has like a social worker in their life, because we're not a social worker. We don't do approvals, right? Like it's not, it doesn't work that way. So they need a social worker in their life. But that's going to be the question, because a lot of people who come out of the child welfare system, by that age, they're ready for independence and they don't need anyone. So how do we kind of say, we think you do, without being patronizing, right?
Although you put yourself out in such a way that when they soon realize that they do, they'll know to reach out to you, because they will soon realize it. It wouldn't even take a year for them to realize that, yeah, I'm really not prepared for this independent living at all,
Yeah.
I remember lots of girls I've met who came out, and the sad things are they always headed for all the wrong places, because they really didn't have a sense of what is right and what is different. And, they just ended up in the wrong places all the time. And then it set them off on the wrong path. They got beaten about a little bit, and it took a long time to get back on track again. A journey that is quite unnecessary if they had had somebody along the line who would just guide them, So that's a great
My human said something quite profound to me, which I think really summarizes the role that this can be. I was having a really hard day. I was being really hard on myself. And she said, if you can't be kind to yourself today, I will be kind to you. And that's the kind of self-worth stuff that like no one else in my life knows to say those things to me. No one else. Like I have a beautiful, supportive partner, but like no one else, right? And like feeling like I'm worth showing up for, and having someone understand that my lack of self-worth comes from the way I've been treated, and shifting that treatment, that's huge. That's huge.
massive. That is so truly amazing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Wendy.
How did you discover your human? At least tell us that before we go.
Well, I do training for this program. So I was doing a training and she was in it. And I've always been very clear that I need someone to want me, right? Like, because I can't ask and feel like, just given how things went with my adoptive parents, I was like, I want someone to say, that's the one. I want to have a relationship with this person. And she did the training. And by the end, I had a letter sitting in my inbox from her saying, I really want to be your human and I hope you'll accept me.
Oh, that is just beautiful. And could you already see that she's somebody that could be a good human for you when you were doing the training?
I was already getting on with her so well. I liked her so much. I was like, this person's so cool. I had no idea. She was interested. So I was like, what?
But you would have hoped that she would be the human for you. Did you hope at all? Or
Well,
you
I
didn't
wanted
dare?
someone. I really wanted someone. I wanted someone, but I was not expecting it to happen for me, if I'm being honest.
Wow.
Yeah.
And she's turned out to be an amazing human. That is lovely. That is truly beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's important. Yeah. And how long have you had her in your life?
I'm going on about 2.5 years now.
I just want to mention too that Wendy has written a book. I know she mentioned it right at the beginning. And I think it would be lovely. I don't know, Wendy, if you have something you'd like to share with us, but I thought
about the book. The title of the book.
But yeah, if you could share, I know they're quite short, but would you be open to reading one of your poems for us?
Yeah.
That's not putting on the spot too much.
No, it's good. It's good. I do this all the time. Thank you so much. Yeah. So yes, I wrote a book. It actually features poetry from the ages of 12 to 30, and it's all about my adoption experience. It's called The Heart That Silence Built, which is my heart. And I'm going to read you a poem that I wrote about my sibling when I found out that they change your birth certificate after you're adopted to list the adoptive parents as your biological parents.
Terrible practice.
I didn't know that for a long time.
Put that out there.
Terrible.
Yeah. Terrible practice.
So I hope this summarizes a lot of like the secrecy and identity that we've been talking about today.
Beautiful.
I was told not to teach you your name. Reborn at 3 years old, there were always reasons why we weren't sisters. Half my blood, all my heart. But then they locked who you were away, and part of me by extension. You became someone new. They rewrote the pages we had scribbled. Not all the parts were beautiful, but the parts where you smiled don't fade. Now you'll never be that person again. I know you don't understand, but what of the day that you do? Then what shall I say? You're two people and one. You're here, but you've been changed. We have a shared history, and the weight of that is mine to bear alone for now. They ripped you from our mother's womb and bled the parts of her and you from our open wounds. My mother, now yours, not really anymore, because the proof of who I am is in my hands while yours are empty, but I am here for you, always. One thing I like to share about that poem is the 2 opening lines, I was told not to teach you your name, is a literal interpretation of my experience. When they were preparing for my sister's adoption, my worker swung by and said, you can't teach your sister her name because it's going to change soon, as if it was the most casual ask in the world. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so moving, honestly. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for the space.
So beautiful. I think
beautiful.
this is such a testament as to why prospective adoptive parents need to listen to the voices of adopted people, right? We don't do this because it's fun all the time. We know this takes a lot out of adopted people to share their stories and their experience. And this is one thing that I just feel so passionate that every adoptive parent should pick up multiple books, poetry, whether it's podcasts, forums. Listen, listen, listen. And The Heart That Silence Built is absolutely beautiful. I have a copy. I've read it. I have used it with Wendy's permission, working with adoptive parents. It's just such a powerful testament to your journey and your experience, you know. And I know there's a new edition has come out as well, where you've added some new poems, which is awesome. So we will definitely put all your details at the end of the show notes, so folks
so people can get the book.
Can get the book.
Thanks.
And because I just think it's so important to listen, you know, and to be still and listen and receive the messaging. Because that poem alone, I'm sitting here trying not to tear up and just visually thinking about it all is wow.
And I think also it's not just about listening, isn't it? It's about listening and being open to learning.
Yes.
Because, you know, you can just listen to something because it's being said and you go away and it makes no difference in your life at all.
True.
But if you understanding that there's a human element here, there's a concept in here that I may not be familiar with, but I need to know it, because that needs to affect the way that I parent my children if I'm a adoptive parent, you know. And if I don't listen, then I'm heading off in the wrong direction again. So thank you for sharing that. And I just wanted to share the fact that you were so open with your emotions, and particularly honor you, because I know that a lot of people who are going through this difficult part do not have language to express their emotions. That you have actually got to the place where you have developed the language to express it in poetry. That's a phenomenal achievement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I got lots of support along the way.
You did. Yeah, well, you've got a human, haven't you? Would you say that you are your sister's human, or not exactly because you're a relative? Because you're related.
I think because I'm a relative, it feels more like kin care, because I knew like sometimes you meet the kid at like 16 or 20 even, right?
Yeah.
But I've known my sibling my whole life.
So looking out to her right now, how does it feel? It feels comfortable and everything is working out nicely, is it?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's not that simple. It's hard. It's a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Feeling and a lot of important self-reflection.
Sure.
And I have support, right? So when you have hard things, all you can hope for is support, and I have that. So I'm one of the fortunate ones, really.
It's amazing. Well done. Thank you so much for sharing with us what you have done, Wendy. It's been an eye-opener, and your frank discussion, your honesty in sharing with us your experiences that we would never know about without your being open. And I thank you for sharing the honesty with us. That's important. Thank you, and your truth. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. To all adopted people around the world, I dedicate the song Desiderata by Les Crane.
And remember what peace.
It's a powerful, life-changing poem for hard times, which inspires hope for all who hear it. My message to all adoptees is summed up in the chorus. You are a child of the universe.
No less than the trees and stars, you have a right to be here. And whether or not it's clear to you, no doubt, the universe is unfolding as it should, and you have a unique and very important part to play in it. So stay strong, positive and focused, and you will thrive. I want to thank you all for joining us at Adoption Dialogue. If you have any questions or comments, send it to us at adoptiondialogue@gmail.com or drop it in the comments section of our social media platforms with the handle Adoption Dialogue without the UE at the end of dialogue. Thank you again. Stay tuned for our next episode on social media. Bye for now and stay blessed.